So his insight into how to live a good life and be a great family person, it was nothing bigger than his small family. He said, that's all you've got, Heath, really. Everything else, just focus on your family, love them. And he said to me, do you love your life? He kind of yelled at me. And I don't know what answer I would have given. There was a long pause. I'm like, do I love my life? And he goes, because I love mine. And he started crying.
Those who are living a life of freedom have optimized themselves and their lives in pursuit of one thing: choice. They've created the financial, geographical, and time freedom to do what they want when they want to. But they've also created freedom from their internal limitations, their story, their biology, and their character. In this podcast, The Freedom Project, it is my attempt to shortcut your learning curve to having total freedom in your life so you can go and do more cool shit. I'm going to bring you deep dives into some of the most inspiring adventure athletes and business owners in the world. I'm also going to give you the key concepts of my coaching process to adventurepreneurs so you can start applying that to your life today. So here is another episode of The Freedom Project. In my mind, the podcast you're about to listen to could be the most important podcast I've ever recorded. I know that's hyperbole, but I really do believe it. And I'm going to prep you. It's a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. You may have heard, like when you listen to this, you may hear me recomposing my thoughts here and there. So be warned. The emotional highs and lows are 100% worth it though, because the lessons are the ones that we all need to hear. I haven't stopped talking about this with my friends and my family since I finished this up. So if you've ever wondered what really, truly makes a good life, or what people actually regret in their final years, or what most people wish they'd done differently in their lives, then this is the podcast for you. Today I'm interviewing Heath Piper, and he's the founder of Playback Interviews. Heath interviews the life stories, or he pulls out the life stories of the elderly, people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even beyond, so that families have a deeply personal memoir of their loved ones. Even though these interviews that Heath records are strictly confidential to the families, Heath has given us an insight into the lessons that have moved him most. And I mean that both emotionally and also progressed him. Like what's actually evolved him as a human being. So this podcast is littered with stories and lessons, and I'm going to say it, they are the ones that you know, but you need to hear again. So you're going to enjoy this. Before we actually tuck into the show, I want to give you a very quick update on my coaching services because things are shifting and I haven't really done that for a while on here, and I know a few of you will be somewhat interested in this. So the Adventurepreneur Collective has evolved and has become what I've always been longing to coach: how to be who you're meant to be. We cover 3 essential topics in it: how to stop living a life that doesn't make you into who you're supposed to be, how to stop feeling frantic and imprecise and rushed, and finally, how to rid yourself of an unclear and imprecise mind. Anyway, here's the update. I'm changing the way I deliver this coaching, and I'm making it far more of an intimate experience, both in terms of the way that I actually coach, but also in the community too. This isn't going to be one of those you join up and there's 1,000 people on board. This is going to be you and I know each other very, very well. And you know the rest of the community, the people who are going to hold you to a higher standard than you can hold yourself, exceptionally well here. You will find lifelong friends. I mean, we're going to all get together and go for a hike very, very soon. It's that kind of thing. Like, that's the kind of community we're building here. So I'm only working with those who A, apply, and B, fit the bill. And I'm limiting the membership to 40 members at any one time. What's more, I'm only going to be accepting 4 new sign-ups per month. The group is currently 15 strong, and with another 2 joining in the April batch. So there's only 2 more spaces to be had before May. So if you really want to get going, this is the time to move. If you are interested in exploring what more freedom, self-mastery, and effectiveness would do in your life, shoot me a message on Instagram. Basically, head to Instagram, search my name, Tom Foxley, and ping me a message saying you're interested in joining my coaching services. Now, let's get on with an incredible show with Heath Piper. I truly think you're going to adore this episode. Heath, let's start this by saying welcome to the show. Absolute pleasure to have you on board, mate.
Tom, appreciate it. It's great to be with you, and I only know you through the internet world, so to meet you face to face, it's quite nice. Yeah, so yeah, great to meet you.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Really looking forward to doing this. And for the people who don't know what you're doing and kind of would like an intro to you, can you explain a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, very simply, I can't even speak, it's 4 a.m. What is the word, Tom?
Simplistically,
it is I travel around Australia and I capture the life stories of 60, 70, 80 and 90-year-olds. So I usually go into the living room or where they're living, and it's a very simple 2 microphone setup, and I'm not only asking questions about their early life, of course, but there's something that, I don't know, it's just maybe it's all my life experiences or what I've done and my skill set or something, but they're not interviews anymore. They're like conversations that are turning into this audio memoir, audio art thing that quite life affirming, I've got to say. So I spent a couple of hours with the person, so last week I was with a 99-year-old, and it just struck me because the whole pre-interview, I give her a call and she said, "Look, Heath, I don't know why you're interviewing me. I've had such a middle class, nothing life. You asked 2 questions, Tom, and it's just this open hearted conversation that these things will never happen again in Australia. Like the way her child was born in the country under the most dire circumstances. The fact she survived, it's serendipitous how it happened. It's like when you're listening to the story, you're like, well, there's someone watching over your life because you should have died." And then you trace their life like throughout all these weaving things. And it makes me question even my own faith in whatever it is I'm doing, because you hear these stories and they're still alive, they're still going. So it makes you, as a person, as an interviewer, but as a piece of long-lasting audio memory of your loved one, yeah, they're something. Yeah, like, did that sum it up? I guess.
Yeah, fantastically. That's such a different memory to have compared to a kind of black and white photo of them as a younger person, or a few photos you got with them, or maybe a bit of video here and there. To have that intentional conversation with someone who, I suppose, doesn't know them intimately, who can come at that with a real curiosity without any assumptions with that as well. That must be such a privilege, and you must get some fascinating elements out of it.
Yeah, I was very early on. I come from a comedy radio show background with my best mate. When I started this, one of the first, you think you're going to hear some comical stories of trudging through the snow, going to school, these stories from that that your granddad or your grandparent used to tell you, the funny ones. Very quickly, I realized the responsibility I had to get not only the questions right, but the way I was conducting myself. And, okay, so when a 90-year-old is, because I am an outsider, and they've been ruminating on these things their whole life, and they finally get to tell someone, kind of, when they're telling me that they're completely and utterly lonely because they've lost their lifelong partner, and they're bawling their eyes out to me, what do I do? So how do I hold that space for them? How do I look them back in the eye and say, hey, it's okay? Or do I ask another question? So these things, I had to develop this like heartstring muscle that I'd never had in my life. I could never actually look at people in the eye, I've got to say. I found that really difficult for my whole life. But during this thing, I just lock in with this other human, and it becomes, this interview where they're espousing not just their life successes, but really their little nuanced things that they get caught up on. Your own mind just tricks you. And even at 90, 99, 100, whatever their age, they're still thinking about these things. So, yeah, it's changing me, I've got to say, in a big way.
Yeah, there's a few questions I really want to get to, and that was one of the big ones. Like, how does having these kind of conversations change the way you live your life or the things you do or how you think? Because it's so rare that we sit down with anyone and speak to them for 2 hours straight up. It's one of the reasons I love this podcast, because for an hour or so, I get to speak to someone who has a completely different worldview to me, and like I get to communicate. But they're very rarely, or never so far, beyond 60 years of age, I think. So to speak to someone who's seen far more than that and to have a very deep conversation must really change the way you do things.
Yeah, it does, because they're very real conversations as well, because they know their time is finite, but sometimes they really do know. Like, have you seen that film? It's a Justin Timberlake film. It's pretty good. It's called Time, and everyone has like the countdown of the time that they have left on their world.
I
It's a
haven't
great
seen it.
movie. Anyway, it's kind of like that. He knew really to the month when he was going to pass, and wow, he had written because I send the questions to them beforehand so they can consider their responses, because I want them to really not just be put on the spot, because it's their life. They've got one chance with me, and I've got one chance with them to record the best bits that they think and the worst bits and how they got through that. So when they're, telling me, and they often haven't told their family some of this, that they know when they're going to die, well, what have they made of their time here on Earth? What do they think are the important things to, sort of as a roadmap, a rough guide map to their grandkids? They always call out their grandkids in a way, like they speak directly to them, which is very, sometimes quite emotional for the whole room. And sometimes we have more than one person in there, because the family sometimes like to watch. I'm not sure, they just like to get the whole experience and hear it as well. So, yeah, and the big one is, and it's one that I've noticed a lot of your guests talk about, and you talk about as well, is live for the moment and in the moment. It seems to be this huge theme, and I've interviewed well over 200 people now, so 600 hours of these conversations, and there's a lot to take in, and I'm still trying to work out what I'm really learning from it, but that is a big one. So I spend a lot of my time, my spare time, trying to do that, to work on that, to then take that through my life. And I see no difference to me really being in the moment with my son, who's 5, and being in an interview, because I want to be present, because that seems to be the way you enjoy life more. It's the only real concrete piece of advice they're all saying in their own words. And some are very religious, and they might give me whole scriptures from texts or whatever they've studied throughout their life, and they're very articulate and intelligent, and they've been, because they grew up with so many books, they're so widely read. So obviously sometimes they're telling me things I have no idea what they're saying. I really don't, because they've read books from 1935. Have you read that book, Heath? No, I haven't read that book. So yeah, that's how it's changing me. And like you said, people never get listened to. They really don't. And it's the first time I can tell they are really being listened to by someone. And it's taught me to listen to my wife, to really listen to her, because she wants to help me. So that's a big one.
That's huge. Are there any questions you ask that have a kind of outsized response, like one you'll go to and you go, okay, this is something that I know is going to get something consistently, or kind of sparks a reflectiveness that other questions don't?
Seemingly, the families want to know what the regrets are of the person.
Yeah.
It's a huge one. They always say, make sure you find out their regrets. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe because people don't want to make the same mistakes, or what has eaten this person up. But you can't just ask that. I tried. So what are your regrets? And well, I don't really have any. So you need to come at it a different way. What's the emotion? Because when people go through their life, actually, they're often quite factual. Well, I went to this place on this date and we had 3 kids, and then by this time they were gone. And there's no emotion in that. So how do we get that? Well, they love talking about their childhood because it was so long ago, and it's from a forgotten time in Australia, anywhere in the world, really. And so one of the questions is, when you go to your childhood home, what room do you go to in your mind? And this just brings up, it's a simple question, it just brings up this amazing recall of memories. And you have to help them do this because it's so long ago. But the other one is, and I ask it differently every time depending on the conversation, but who or what has been the greatest love of your life? Now, that is the hardest question because I cannot summate mine now at 42. How could I do it at 90? The answers to that are: one, incredibly beautiful because I've given them time to think about the answer. Secondly, they're quite controversial sometimes, but so beautifully open-hearted because obviously sometimes I'm expecting an answer of my wife of 50 years. I love her. She's been the greatest love of my life. Some say, I'm sorry, my wife might get upset by this, but I had this love when I was 18. And they tell me this love story, the one that got away. And it's so beautiful because it's from a different time and they love that person and they remarried, but they've thought about it. And I don't find that negative. I find it's pretty endearing. And because then they go on to say, but I really love my wife. And they go on to talk about them. So that there are a couple of examples of, yeah, the answers that I look forward to because it shows a lot about that person, I think, and their character and what they have thought to be important here.
You must see the whole human. And what I mean by that is we spend so much time crafting a persona that we like to display to the world, that's something that is kind of socially acceptable, but also internally respectable, and something that we're kind of happy to show because we know there's little vulnerability that can get through it. But a conversation that you know is going to be recorded for prosperity and something that you know is happening toward the end of your life, there must be, for want of a better phrase, a fuck it mentality of, hey, I'm just going to go for this and just see where this goes, and like I'm going to show my full humanity.
Correct. And they're dressing up, Tom. The gentlemen wear their best jackets. The ladies wear their best frocks. They're trying. And I put a little bit of pressure on them. I do. I ask them to step up. So when's your best part of your day? When are you at your best? 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock? When is it? What do you normally drink at that time? Let's get that. Try and be your best self because they grew up with the wireless. They understand. They have probably put themselves in an interview position in their mind many times throughout. They grew up with the induction or introduction to television. They've seen it all. They've seen so many interviews, way more than I have. So I don't give them any coaching. Why would I? At this age, 60, it starts, I believe. But really, from 75 onwards, they are so themselves. Like you said, they have dropped every single piece of what they think or their story, really. They're telling me their story, but in the same At the same time, they're telling me they've dropped it as well, and they no longer, they're a different person because of all the things that have changed them. It's very life affirming because it's giving me and us something to aim at. Like if we're getting to that age and you're still espousing, like, live for the day, try and be busy, keep the mind active, do exercise, all these things that we know now that we're doing, but they're still doing at that age. And they've got a lot to offer still of the world. So, yeah, it's
What are the themes of people who seem to be content with their life?
they're not any longer hard on themselves, which is something I struggle with. So they're forgiven themselves and they genuinely love themselves. And they'll say that. And there's no ego attached to that because they've been through the fire or something. And you look back at their lives, so many have lost something incredibly important to them. Countries, homelands, kids, and they've been through wars, they've been through darker times than you could possibly imagine as part of, like you said, that full spectrum of humanity. And they've somehow made a life for themselves and they're successful in their own mind. They have no comparison. They don't actually steal their own joy through the thief of comparison because they don't think like that. They've stopped thinking that way. And they do talk about keeping up with the Joneses around about my age, 40. They say that that was a big part of their life, raising kids, trying to be something as a dad, and doing whatever they're doing, trying to do it at the best of their ability. But contentment seems to come with loving yourself and really trying to be here present, but they're of service as well. So looking after grandkids or really active in the community, that's a big thing that they tell me as well. You must keep in touch with your friends, Heath. They're all you've got at the end. Make sure. And I've reached out to people that I haven't talked to in 20 years, and I don't burn bridges. So it's like we've never not talked for 20 years. So that's another thing, I guess, that I've learned to do is, call your friend. And phone calls are so unexpected. When your phone rings, you're like, who is it? And if it's your mate and they've called a few times, you will answer. And it's usually just everyone feels a bit better after that phone call. So, yeah, it's important.
That's a really important one. Something that, that's something that I'm going to take from this absolutely and implement it. I find it so easy to kind of see my mission for, I've got these goals, like in business I want to do this, in my training I want to do this, I've got this trip to Pakistan coming up, we're doing this with our family, like these things to do, and very rarely do you get the opportunity to speak to your friend and would you make the time and the effort to do it because I'll speak to them another day, I'll catch up next year, I haven't thought of them. Chris Williamson uses this idea of if I think of someone in a positive way, I'm guessing. If I think of someone, I send them a text and let them know that I was thinking of them. I think that's a really lovely way to do it, but phone call is a different level.
I do that too. And the phone call is a different level because it is very personal. It's like this, it is a radio show in your ear. It's really in there, or in your surround car stereo, whatever you do in your life. And that's the other thing. And I would agree with Chris, and that sentiment you just pointed out was I'm not the greatest writer. It's a bit of a weakness of mine. And I send little short voicemail messages, but I do think about them and I'll try and make them entertaining. And so if they can't talk to me, at least they're going to listen to that. And I'll say, just call me, make sure you give me a call and all those sorts of things. So that's how I've opened it up as well, by doing those things. And I've been getting a few back, and it's very disarming because they tell you things that you've forgotten about from your childhood or growing up at school together. And it's nice to be reminded of that self because you might have been optimistic at that time of your life. And you're like, oh yeah, what was I doing around that time? And it just goes through a bit of self-reflection. And yeah, I think you can get stuck in your own current life situation and forget really about all the things that you've done. But there's never a time that you do reflect on your life. Like we've said, there's never a time that you're going to sit down, Tom, really, oh, today's the day, clear the schedule, I'm just thinking about it all. But maybe you should, because it is incredibly important, because it just builds that sense of self and the authenticness of you, and your life surely will get better if you're yourself all the time. And I ask that question, do you feel the most like you've felt yourself in your whole life? And they all say yes. They're so comfortable in their own skin. And it must be lovely. We're just got to wait till we're 80, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah, just got to 8 decades of pretending to be someone else, and then we'll nail it.
I don't know if I can give you any shortcuts. If that's what you're looking for, but it's because it's all down to self-work and the daily work, seemingly.
Well, I think it's also like a piece of music, or an album is probably a better way to put it. Like, remember when albums like actually constructed to have a flow to them, like, I don't know, Dark Side of the Moon or something like that. It's got that flow to it, and it's all there for a reason, and it's a journey that you go on, and it's not just a track. And I think the mistake that we make is, this moment right now is supposed to be perfect, and if it's not, then there's something wrong with it. Whereas the moment of suffering is in the movie for a reason, and it gives you salience, and it probably gives you that opportunity to eventually become the person you're supposed to be, to be comfortable in your own skin, as opposed to rejecting the discomfort of it.
Yeah, you've got to have that perspective. That it's kind of why I love catching a plane and getting the window seat, even though I'm a bit claustrophobic in there. It's because you look out the window on a clear day, especially when you're coming into land, there's all those cars down there. Everyone's got their little world and their worries and their stresses, and it just gives you this, does it matter? Like, we're just living our lives. So how can we get to a place in our minds, because we seem to be just the own worst enemies ourselves, and that is what they're telling me about regrets. It's never some major car crash or something they have done. It's very rare. It is their own. No one else on earth would be thinking about it but them. This thing that they're
Is it the things they didn't do? Is it the
Correct.
things they failed to act on?
Yep. Yeah. Things they didn't do. A lot of times it's what they didn't say to someone. And it's also, yeah, it's just so small and so insignificant, but it's eaten them up for decades, for absolute decades. And then I have said to them before, why are you so hard on yourself? Or why do you think you were? And it just opens this floodgate of emotion and realness. And just when that happens in the conversation, it goes from interview, it just, like, we're having a real conversation. And these are what they're turning into. And I think at the start, to warm people up, you do a few questions, but yeah, this is why I have to also up my game in life, and because they're so far advanced in their spiritual realm of inner life, that I was getting lost a bit, and I needed to reconnect with that, and which I hadn't done in years. Oh yeah, whatever you normally do to get outside of yourself, meditation or exercise, or I've always been an exerciser, but more of the sitting with myself. So yeah, I can't even remember what your initial comment or question was, but I think we went to an interesting thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. Who stands out of all the people that you've interviewed? Who stands out of that crowd?
I have learned not to judge people as well. Really not judge them at all for their life. Because like you said, you don't know what's coming next. So they just might be in a spot right there of their own personal version of hell. And who am I to judge that, or what they are espousing to be success for them may not be mine. So who am I to judge that? I should be happy for them. They've, like, for example, a guy lived in the smallest, I've got to say, shithole. I went there in Australia. There's nothing there. There's 15 people. There's a big sign, 15 people. But his resume, because they sort of send me a little mini autobiography, they might write one, and he's just had this most incredible life, so successful, made an incredible amount of money, but he lives in this tiny house full of memorabilia from his childhood because he went to school there, and he's lived there his whole life, but he'd gone away on business around the world, etc. And yeah, reading his autobiography, I was like, why would you live a place for your whole life like this? This guy, what? It's going to be a very average life. I was on the farm, I got married. So that one showed me, don't do that, Heath. And it's the other reason why I've had some high profile people here in Australia, high profile in fields I have no idea about. And the family says, just Google them, Heath, Google them. Now, I don't do that. That's a deliberate choice because all those stories are already out there. The family can Google them. They told me they have. So they already know all those stories. There's nothing new. There's no new territory there for me. So this one gentleman, this is very recent, Tom, and like I said, it's very hard to not remember them all, but that's why I keep a lot of voice memos after I do interviews to remind me of what we spoke about, and so I can sort of remember them. But there was a very recent one where he knew he was going to die, but he was still not at his peak of his powers as a human being, but he had done so much, and he was the best of the best. And I'm telling you, he made a huge impact on humanity. So his insight into how to live a good life and be a great family person, it was nothing bigger than his small family. He said, that's all you've got, Heath, really. Everything else, just focus on your family, love them. And he said to me, do you love your life? He kind of yelled at me. And I don't know what answer I would have given. There was a long pause. And I'm like, do I love my life? And he goes, because I love mine. And he started crying. Now, he said to me before the interview, there's no way, I've done millions of media interviews. You'll never get any emotion out of me. And he's bawling, I'm crying. And then just last week, so I interviewed him last October, and I got a text from the family. And this is what I'm saying, Tom, about how I need to get these right. And it gets me a little bit amped up because, yeah, I received a text, said, can you call me, Heath? And I called the person who commissioned me. It was this gentleman's daughter, and he said, we've just spent the last night with him in the hospital room. He's in a coma, and we played the interview just so he could hear it because he loved it, and just so we could hear his voice. And so I knew that was going to come. I knew that day would happen. And it's just, these things hit me. You think you're going to be prepared through your own self inner work and trying hard to manage yourself as a human being, but they hit you like this, and it shows me I am on the right path, and I'm just going to keep going and keep doing this. And it was a lot to take, I guess.
Yeah, but this is the reason I wanted to get you on the show, because I think it's a conversation that none of us are having, but it's such a beautiful thing to do, not only as a gift for the family and the person in question, but the wisdom that must come out of that, the true principles behind a life well lived must be just repeated to you over and over and over again. And like, it's something that we bypass. Like, we're so wrapped up in the minutiae of life. And oh, well, I've got to do this, and the stress and anxiety of like moving, especially I think in 30s, 40s, 50s, that we don't stop and consider this. And like, it's such a beautiful thing you're doing, man.
So the wisdom that keeps coming out is get on with it. And I didn't know what that meant. A plethora, and it was a high number of them kept saying, oh, I just get on with it. So they'd answer a question like that. And I thought it was going to be a very deep, wow, what answer I'm going to get here. And it's, nah, I just get on with it. I was starting to get a little bit annoyed by this. Like, what does this mean? And then through time spent with these people and hearing stories of similar natures. So post World War II, so I'm interviewing people, their dads went to war. And so dad got back. Now, there's two sorts of men really that were coming back. And the first would go to the pub, and that thing would end up destroying them. And even the family would say, though, and this is an interesting take, they say to me, well, alcohol is actually a great drug, Heath, because it would help him forget. But it's the thing that killed him, because that's what they died of, alcohol poisoning. So there's that sort of dad that would go down that route and ruin the family. And there's a lot of anger there, of course. But they've forgiven them because now they've got the historical context of what they did and what they went through in the war, because they didn't talk about it. The second option is, right, that happened. We are never to talk about it. Let's get on with it. Get on with life. Let's just build a life for ourselves. So they never spoke about it. And stories from around that time of things like, this is forgotten history. So they'd be at school, these kids, and their dad's back, or the dad hasn't returned, but there's a teacher out the front, a young teacher, female teacher, and everyone knows, the whole community knows that their boyfriend or fiance or husband has died in the war, but no one says anything because it wasn't the thing to do. But they desperately wanted to say to their teacher, and this is their regret, this is the thing that some people have said to me, it's that type of person, the teacher, who they all knew was going through hell, but society, customs, whatever it was, just, you okay, miss? I heard you, do you need anything? Because they were these women who were trying to keep it together, but they were teaching, and then a tear would just roll down, and it just was this. Yeah, so the wisdom's coming out from all of those experiences, and it's just a different way of holding a value system because they've been through something major that has completely changed their life. So, like you said, it's more down to these old values of really taking time. And I call this business that I'm doing a slow business because I want to take my time with things. And it's all we've got. So there's this culture of, like you already mentioned, that you're just always pushing or something. I'm telling you, it's probably the thing that especially men are most regretful of. And that's why they're doing second chance parenting with their grandkids, because they worked too much. And they said, what was the extra money for? Because I was never home for my kids. And we've had huge disagreements about it when they've been older, when they've been able to confront me and said, you were absent dad. And now they're making up for it to the detriment of their own health. Often they're just in there showing their kids how good a parent I am now with your kids. And so they're taking on a lot of that responsibility, which is this dichotomy of beauty, but also this guilt. And yeah, how do you get around that? I'm not sure.
It's one of the things that I'm kind of, this might seem a tangent, but I'm coming to lose the love with the stoic approach to life of just remove the emotion and do the thing, because it's so utilitarian. It's so remove the beauty and the depth and the music from existence, and the true. I just feel like when I've embodied that, I've missed the moments. I've been so highly strung in terms of get this shit done, and I've missed the moment with my wife or my dog or like family, because I'm so thinking about like what's next as opposed to this moment and here now. And you saying that around, especially because like my wife and I think I'm starting a family soon, and that's kind of on my mind too. So it's like that is really important, and I don't think there's enough people that can hear that enough time.
When you spend time with the elderly, your time slows down. It's like the clock slows. It really does. And not in a bad way, like, oh, this is 2 hours of granny. Gee. It's really because they move slower, naturally, but also they want to talk. Like, do you know, all the conversations I seem to have in my life are so fleeting and quick. And I've got 2 small kids, so it's very hard to have an ongoing conversation with someone, but they're very fast. And how are you going? Yeah, quick summation of this. But elderly people, because they've got time, and I know it's time, but you can make time for people. And I don't think we do it enough for the people we truly love. And when you're sick, which is going to happen, Tom, it's all coming to you. And this was a foreboding warning from a woman, actually, a lady who, she was so just vivacious and articulate and really sure of herself. And she said, Heath, I sat up quite straight. She said, this is one of the last things she said to me. She goes, it's all coming to you. Joy, depression, the most life, beautiful, affirmational, idealistic things are coming your way, but the most heartache that you'll ever feel in your life. So are you ready? Well, I'm going to try and get ready. And how do you do that? Well, it's by what you just said. It's trying to, as much of your day, be present. And it's all your work, or it's your whole life. Like, I find no distinction now between what I'm doing in my real life. It's all just this one thing. So if I'm doing well in my home life with my wife, I will be better at my job, because I work best. And I think most people work best when they're relaxed. There's that Bill Murray quote that I love. He does his best work when he feels the most relaxed. The more relaxed he gets, the better he does. And I agree. So most people are like that. And sometimes with too much drive and not enough real self-care or love, I write down in my diary most mornings, where is the self-love? What do I mean by that? That just means, what am I really doing for me, Heath, whoever that is, to fill my cup so I can be better for my family and the whole world? Because I ask current events. My wife is Ukrainian. They're involved heavily here in Australia in all the movement around Ukraine. So I ask, in a genuine humanist way, because they've seen the war to end all wars. A few years later, World War II, and there's been peaceful times. And I know people say it's the most peaceful time throughout human history, but even today, the ontological shock that my son looks at me and says, they're what? People do what to each other? And then asking an 85-year-old whose husband died in the war, what do you make of current events? How are we going to transcend this as a human species? Because it doesn't seem like we're doing the right things. Some answers are very pessimistic, and that's quite hard to hear. No hope, Heath. It's pretty much every person for themselves. Just keep your family close. Right, okay. But the other answers are very optimistic, and it all comes down to your own, like, what energy do you bring to your local cashier when you're going through? How you going? Like, look at them. How you going? You having a good day? I used to work at IGA here, or the supermarket when I was young. Yeah, you get through it. Yeah. How much you get an hour now? Just a real conversation that you try and leave every single situation you're in a little bit better, and the world might be a more positive place. And that's what they're saying to do. That's how you're going to change it. And I think it's a pretty good small thing. Pretty idealistic, because it does take a lot of energy, by the way, to do that, and consciously thinking that all the time because you're in a rush. But it doesn't take much effort to really look at someone and say hello. Anyway.
So there's something I don't want to miss, and I want to circle back around to, because I think it's an interesting point. My granny lived, like I messaged you, my granny lived until she was 102 years old, which you see a lot. She was born in the First World War, lived through the Second World War, obviously, and then passed away in like 2017, I think. And it was on her 100th birthday, I asked her, what's the secret to a good life? This is a side story, side quest story. I said, what's the secret to a good life? And she said, lots of boyfriends, which I thought was brilliant. And then the other thing that I spoke about this, and like, she wasn't very reflective, but the few things came out from her. And one of them was that she'd never felt more alive than she did in the war. And the reason behind that was because there was so much community and so much of, we are all working toward one purpose, and we've got this commonality that we know what's good, we know what's bad, and we're working toward that. And like, contrast that to her husband, who came back from India. He was a captain in the army, came back from India with all kinds of things, like a samurai sword. And it's like, where did he get that from? But he never spoke about it again. He died 10, 15 years before her, but he never spoke about it again. There's a really interesting correlation. I know they did very different things within the war effort, but you must see an interesting perspective on war itself.
Definitely. The people got sent off as heroes, and they all talked about it at school, in the playground. Dad's off. He's going to fight the war. We're going to win. They're not going to come. Like, it was a real, because they really had no information getting back. And it was such pie in the sky, real, what you imagine as a kid war to be like, and the reality of that really struck home when the soldiers returned. And like I said, it sort of seemingly went two ways. But even if you're the most peaceful Buddhist and life-loving person, is saying they should just put a bullet in Putin's head. And it's such a violent thing they're saying to me. So it shows me a lot about human nature as well, that there is a limit to the peace. And so I'm not too sure what I'm making of that, and I'm not an expert at all in human psychology. This is just ground truth of what people are saying to me. So that was interesting, that you hear, quite well-to-do, lovely, elderly ladies saying that, and it's with such violence and fury and anger. So that's a side of the humanistic, I guess, psyche that I haven't seen before. What do you make of that, Tom?
What do I make of the idea that they want such a violent action?
Yeah, just how you...
Well, I think you could say that they're seeing the suffering of a huge scale, and they realize that it's probably one person's doing, or at least massive contribution. So maybe it's a kind of, maybe it's the equivalent of, would you pull the lever that switches the train from 5 people to 1 person? Like, maybe it's a version of that. Maybe it's the humanitarian approach.
Interesting. Yeah, see, that's right. That's you don't know whether to take a optimistic side of the human side there or the negative. Yeah, interesting. I knew you'd be good to ask about that.
Okay, so here's a big question about this. What do you think about death now? Now you've done so many of these.
I thought I was okay with it. It really makes me live. There's this, I haven't actually told this story. All right. There's this, I live right near a cemetery, and there's this gravestone I go to regularly. It's from a young guy who died. I didn't know him, 25, died tragically. There's so many flowers there and beer bottles, and just, he was well loved, obviously. And I go there and tell him about my life, what I'm up to. I don't know why I do it. Maybe it's to make me feel alive. Because they're heavy conversations, and because I'm listening so intently, and I have to be very careful with what I consume, like movies and any art, because it really affects me in good and bad ways. So when I'm really listening and they're talking about, losing their kid or nursing a grandkid who died in their arms, and all these things about death really make me quite fearful, because you automatically just think of your own family, your own kids. And so these huge moments in their life that change them, and they might be the most devout Catholic person in the world, raised that way and have raised their kids that way. Death completely changes them, and they might instantly lose their faith, which has happened in many stories. They say, as soon as my husband died, that's what made me upset, because I was like, he's still here. Why did you take him? I don't believe anymore. And they don't become nihilistic. They actually just become more live for the day, because it's all we've got. So when I think about my own mortality and death, I hope to be one of these. I want to be doing this for the next 30 years. And I hope when I am at 80 or 90, Tom, you and I sit down again and have a conversation about what we've done. And we're both proud of ourselves for being ourselves, because you won't have regrets if you're yourself and you feel that way, which takes daily work to connect with whoever you are. You just won't have regrets, because every decision you've ever made, you know that you've just done the best as that person in that time that you could. So that's what I'm trying to do. But yeah, I think I'm more afraid of it now than ever. Damn.
That's interesting.
Damn.
That's
Yeah,
really
it
interesting.
really, which is what I wouldn't have thought. So that, and I
Yeah,
haven't
I would have thought it'd be
really
the
thought
opposite.
about that, Tom. It's a great question.
I would think it'd be the opposite. I would think the more you kind of associated with something or got to know it, the the more comprehensible it would be. But also makes sense that you're really looking at it in the eye on a consistent basis, not as a conceptual thing, but as a visceral, like physical, actually in front of you thing in life. Like it's almost like a physical object.
Well, I'm seeing what happens to people, because they're explaining this time when they were extremely athletic and superhuman in a way. They're describing some of the things they've done and achievements. And then before me is this frail old human being. And they're very frustrated that they can't do the things that they used to be, because that's taken away. If you're an active person, I don't know how this is going to look with how people are so into their fitness now, when that's taken away from them when they're old. That's why you can't rely just on one tool, because if one of them goes, what else are you going to do to fill your cup? And that's gone for them. And so they've got a bit of frustration there. But it is sad in a way. They're there because, and also they, when they know they're going to die, and or they're quite elderly, often they also tell me, "I'm too tired, Heath, to go on. I don't want to go
My
on."
granny said the same. She's like, I'm done. I'm
And
tired now.
wow, that's incredible that they're so open about that. Yeah, they've accepted everything, and they've accepted death. And I think the reason I'm a little bit more, I feel like I know even less than I've known about death and the end of life, is because the answers they're not uniform. And so I don't know, when I'm listening, I'm like, oh yeah, if that's what and you can tell that's why they believe in what they believe in, because of all the events that have happened to them. And so things like that give great comfort to people are, and they tell me really personal things, like people who say that their family who have passed are all in a cloud looking down at them all the time, or that they're psychic and they can talk to their family. And who am I to not believe a 95-year-old who's telling me that, when their whole life has been based, and their whole story is based on truth? So yeah, that throws me. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's why I guess it's been more confusing than just reading a book on accepting death, because you go, well, they've got a linear line there of thought. But these are they're so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I suppose it's not contained within 300 pages. It's not finite, the view of it. You're
Yeah.
coming from, it's so nebulous. There's so many different perspectives and so many individual lives lived that are building towards that. One of the things that you mentioned is this kind of get on with it mentality. You just got to get on with it. And I was thinking that's quite a traditional view to have. Are there any views that are more traditional, conservative, maybe, that you've found truth in that you didn't have before? And the reason I'm asking that is because, to give your current, to give you time to think about this as well, you think about how we approach challenge now. And I personally think the word trauma is thrown around far too liberally. But there's micro traumas, there's microaggressions, there's a lot of, and I'm not using this as kind of bashing liberal approaches or anything like that, but I do feel that we're losing some of the wisdom in a traditional narrative. So are there things that kind of ways of living or principles or approaches to life that are more traditional that you found utility in or salience in, having spoken to these people?
So what is true love, and what does love mean to you as a person, and what is your love language to the person in your life that you do love? So after 62 years of marriage, if you're married, I'm sure it is hopefully on the agenda that you're going to live a long life together and grow old together and experience things you can experience together with a partner, someone in your corner. So what does your love language, or how do you show that love on the day to day? I ask that, and the answers are so beautiful. Every time he walks past me, because I sometimes interview them together at the end about their love story and how they met. Oh, he just walks past me, he always rubs the small of my back. It's a little bit annoying, but I guess it's a lovely thing to do. Now, the values of marriage, and I'm not a proponent, I am married, but I'm not saying it's what I believe, this is just what I'm hearing, is that it's still so important for them, because the good times, it's easy to be good and optimistic and great dad and husband in the good times. So I interviewed an 89-year-old Romanian immigrant who left communist Romania when he was 13. A hard life, very intellectual person, but done wondrous things here in Australia. He got on with it. I said, how long have you been married? He said, 61 good years. I said, what does that mean? And he said, I'm now looking after my wife who has dementia full time. I'm tired, I'm old, and this is not how I thought my life would go. I love her and I love doing it because I told her I would look after her forever, and she's looked after me, and I'm going to do it. So she was also a nurse, and a very good one at that. And so she has all these old lady nurse friends who are still alive coming around doing, like, helping out. That's what I'm saying. You've got to be really honest with your friends and just tell them why you love them. Not all the time. Don't be that person, but just once in a while. Just love having you in my life. And those things, those traditional, like, not giving up on people that you love, really, that's what it comes down to. And really sticking by them. And I need to get better at that, personally. I'm really good in the great times. But when it gets tough, do I crumble? You know, and these are the things you want to show your son and you want to impress your wife with. So, yeah, they're some of the things. I hope that is what you're after, because marriage to them, yeah, is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, that got me. That got me in the feels. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think is an important piece to bring up? Anything that you kind of, it'd be an opportunity wasted if we didn't bring it up?
I just really think no matter what you're doing in your life, it just seems to be, and the thing I've mentioned numerous times is you've really got to work out what you are or who you are, and really connect with that person and ask yourself, what do I want to do with my time here on earth? So what would it look like? What would the best day under my current situation where I live, what would that look like if it was just this perfect day? Oh, how would I get to that? If you start stacking up these moments where you're really there, and you stack up those days, and you have a bad day, but mostly they're good, you're going to have a good life. And it's very singular, this experience. And I think the more we share and get a little bit over I'm struggling with small talk now, Tom. And as you've probably experienced in this conversation, every single person I talk to now, when they find out what I do, or, you know, they might know of that, well, it's okay. Well, then it's beautiful and it's lovely. And it's one of these great wonders of what doors open to you when you are yourself. And it's taken me a massive battle to get there. And I'm working on it every day. So like you, like whoever watches this, I'm doing the same thing as you, just trying my hardest. And I'm going to try and be a little bit more. If I ever had the opportunity to travel in time, if you just, you know, go with me on that for a second, or give my former younger self some advice, it would be kind. Just be kind to yourself, Heath. You'll be okay. That's all. Yeah.
That is a beautiful place to wrap up. Where can people find out more about you, follow your work, and hopefully commission you to do some incredible work?
Playbackinterviews.com.au or playback_interviews at Instagram. I'm putting videos up there really for my own memory in a way, to remember what I've been doing and feeling. So I can't be anything but myself. I just can't at the moment. So if I met you in real life, Tom, this would be exactly the same conversation we'd have. And I have a commission in the UK and England, but it's just not worth is the wrong word, but I would need to get some more to be able to travel over there. So at the moment, I'm doing everywhere in Australia, but I know for a fact that it's just coming. That yeah, I'll be overseas, and hopefully, I'll if I'm there, I'll come and see you, Tom. And
Yeah, please do.
yeah, all right.
Please do.
Thanks, mate.
There's
You're very good at this. You're very affable, and I just it's going to be great. I'm going to keep following along in your life as well, your journey. So
appreciate it, man. Really do appreciate it. This has been one of the most I don't want to say moving, although it has been very moving, but it's made concrete a lot of things in my mind that I know I need to, that I know are the right answers, and that are like, this is really the real shit, the things that need to be done and the way I need to act. So yeah, thank you for this. I found it really personally very valuable, and I think honestly it's one of the most important podcasts that I've ever recorded. So thank you.
thank you. Thanks, Tom, for having me. Cheers.